E nós estamos aqui comemorando esse ano no Brasil os 20 anos das suas primeiras publicações no nosso país. Estão sendo até relançadas as crônicas de áudio esse ano aqui. E como é que se deu a receptividade da sua obra a partir dos leitores brasileiros? O senhor já teve a possibilidade de vir ao Brasil, ter contato com esses leitores? Pensa em vir mais ao nosso país? Porque uma das coisas que mais me impressiona é que, quando foi divulgado que eu iria fazer essa conversa com o senhor, inúmeras pessoas entraram em contato, pessoas do trabalho, pessoas que eu tenho amizade há muitos anos, e que eu nem sabia que eram suas leitoras, e que vieram entrar em contato comigo para que pudessem fazer perguntas. Eu trouxe algumas perguntas deles também. Como é que se deu a recepção da sua obra aqui no Brasil?
The reception of my work in Brazil was incredibly flattering. I mean, it was extraordinary. Judy, that's my wife, and I made a trip to Rio de Janeiro some years ago and were overwhelmed by the reception we got. I don't know what it is about Brazil, but you've been very, very good to me. You evidently like my book, so in return all I can say is I love Brazil. Brazil has been very good to me.
Que maravilha! E eu posso dizer que é extremamente recíproco, porque esse amor que o senhor sentiu pelo Brasil é o que os brasileiros sentem pela sua obra também. A sua obra, ela faz um diálogo muito interessante com várias lendas, com várias histórias e mitos populares. E eu andei lendo em algumas das suas entrevistas que o senhor tem uma certa predileção, um gosto particular pela poesia anglo-saxã. Como o senhor lê esses textos medievais, por exemplo, ou da Idade Moderna? É com o mesmo prazer literário ou é como se fosse um detetive em busca de inspiração?
I think I'm a detective looking for inspiration, but I came across them first when I was at university, which is too long ago to even think about. And I think it was the poetry of the Anglo-Saxons that really interested me first in the Anglo-Saxons. You get a glimpse of their world. It's a very brutal world. And I've been reading it ever since. But these days, when I look through it, I'm looking for details that the poet puts into the poem that I can use in a novel. But the Anglo-Saxon poetry is very difficult to read, as you know. I mean, Anglo-Saxon English sounds nothing like the English of today, almost completely different, sounds more like German. But I do still read it with pleasure. I'm sure the same is true of Portuguese.
Uhum. E já que o senhor se referiu à literatura portuguesa, porventura há algum interesse na literatura em língua portuguesa, um conhecimento sobre esses autores? Nós tivemos alguns autores que trabalharam muito com a história também, e temos uma geração atual muito grande trabalhando com temas históricos. Mas nós temos um autor em língua portuguesa, que é o José Saramago, que ele também utilizou muito a história como pano de fundo para os seus romances. O senhor, por acaso, tem algum contato com a literatura em língua portuguesa?
Sadly, no. I mean, it's just a big blank in my life. I mean, really the only contact I've had with Portuguese history is the story of the Napoleonic Wars, which I wrote about in the Sharp novels. And I spent a lot of time in Portugal following the route of Wellington and his army. But that doesn't make me any kind of expert on Portugal or Portuguese literature, I'm sorry.
Sim. Eu vou aproveitar nesse momento, já que nós estamos falando sobre essa questão, o senhor comentou agora sobre a questão das guerras napoleônicas, a pressão sobre a família real. Eu trouxe aqui uma pergunta de um grande amigo que é um escritor e que trabalha também com muitos temas históricos, que é o Samir Machado de Machado. E ele diz que em Sharp's Devil, o senhor faz o Richard Sharp viajar até o Chile, tem um contato com o Chile. E aí ele me pediu para perguntar para o senhor se alguma chance dele ou algum outro personagem ultrapassar os limites da Cordilheira dos Andes e vir parar em terras tupiniquins?
Well, that would be wonderful. I haven't thought about that, but now you've suggested it, I probably will think about it. So, as I always say, I can't make any promises, but maybe it will happen. I'm sure he'd love to go to Brazil. I liked it, so I'm sure he would love it too.
Acho que ele aproveitaria bastante aqui as nossas terras. Eu acho que ele ia se apaixonar pelo Rio de Janeiro também.
I think he probably would.
Então eu vou aproveitar que eu estou abrindo esse momento para perguntas que as pessoas acabaram me enviando. Olha só que engraçado, como eu disse para o senhor, quando souberam que eu ia fazer essa conversa, muitos amigos vieram conversar e pessoas de áreas bastante distantes da literatura, da história. E eu tenho um amigo que é químico, que é o Douglas Charqueiro, e ele veio efusivamente dizer que era um grande leitor seu e que já tinha lido todos os seus livros que foram publicados no Brasil. E ele queria saber duas coisas. Que o senhor falasse um pouco sobre o seu método, mas eu vou deixar isso para daqui a pouco, numa pergunta específica. Mas se em algum momento o senhor pretende escrever mais coisas sobre a Guerra dos 100 Anos e também sobre uma personagem interessantíssima, que é a Joana d'Arc.
The answer is yes. I do intend to write more set in that period. Although when, I don't know. I mean, I'm getting very old and ancient. I may run out of time, but I do want to write more about that period. It'll probably be a couple of years before I get round to it, though.
Mas o mais interessante também é que todas essas coisas que estamos conversando sobre influência da história acaba por nos abrir cada vez mais possibilidades narrativas. Eu acho que é uma das grandes vantagens de gostar tanto de história e de ter a história como um grande pano de fundo. Porque eu acho que ela é uma fonte inesgotável de inspiração. O senhor não acha isso?
It's an inexhaustible source of inspiration and an inexhaustible store of stories too. I mean, the nice thing about being an historical novelist is that your background to the whole novel is just given to you. I mean, it's given to you by people like you who are real historians. And, you know, we read your books and then we turn it into stories. I mean, I think every writer writes what they want to read, and I always loved history, and I always loved reading historical novels. And when life kicked me in the butt and said, you need to get a job, I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll write historical novels. Been doing it for 40 years now.
Acho que deu certo então, né?
Well, it's turned out that way, yes. I mean, at the time, it seemed crazy. I had a proper job. I was a television producer in Britain. And then I fell madly in love with an American. And she couldn't live in Britain for very good reasons, family reasons. So I said, I'll move to America. And when I got to America, they said, well, you haven't got a green card, you can't work here. So I said to Judy, don't worry, darling, I'll write a book. That was 41 years ago this year. And we're still married, and I'm still writing. So it turned out okay.
Eu vou então partir para algumas perguntas que também nos foram enviadas, que são perguntas mais mais sobre a personagem do escritor. Aqui no Brasil nós temos cada vez mais uma profusão de novos escritores, e as questões que são relacionadas a como se dá o trabalho com a escrita têm interessado cada vez mais gente. E por isso que o escritor acabou se tornando uma fonte de interesse dos novos escritores em questões do tipo: como é a rotina? O senhor escreve todos os dias? Porque num caso específico como o seu, nós sabemos que há uma quantidade muito grande de livros que chegam até nós, e a gente fica pensando, como é possível escrever tanta coisa e de tanta qualidade? Como é que se dá o seu processo de escrita, a sua rotina de escrita?
Well, it looks very boring. Writing is a job like any other job, and it just means that you have to do it every day. I think it was Raymond Chandler who said the only way to be a writer is to put your bum on a chair for 8 hours a day. And that's more or less true. I work regular hours, more or less. Start early in the morning and finish usually about this time at night. And I'm not saying that every hour of that time is spent writing, because it's not. Some of it is spent staring into space. But there really is no excuse except to sit down and do it. And if you have a bad day, well, it doesn't matter. You're just going to have a better day tomorrow. You just keep going. And I was also lucky. I was a journalist for a long time. And being a journalist takes away the fear of the blank page. But I have to say that I think I've written 58 or 59 books. I'm not sure which it is. But every time I start a new book, I think I can't do this. But then all you do is you sit down and you do it. And literally that's it. You just sit down and you do it. And it ain't easy all the time, but it is better than working.
Eu posso dizer que eu estou de total acordo com o senhor. Eu também acho que traz um prazer que poucas profissões trazem. E é muito interessante essa sua passagem, porque em várias entrevistas o senhor fala sobre essa mudança de país, o fato de ter saído da Inglaterra, ido para os Estados Unidos, ter decidido se dedicar à literatura. Isso tudo nos faz ver que há um caminho, que há uma possibilidade, das quais muitos de nós também estamos em busca. E que bom que o senhor, de fato, trabalha todo esse tempo durante o dia, porque os seus leitores agradecem, pode ter certeza absoluta. Eu vou aproveitar, então, nesse momento, para trazer mais uma pergunta de um leitor que fala um pouquinho também sobre a sua questão biográfica, que é um outro grande amigo meu, também historiador, que é o Marcelo Martins, que ele perguntou como é que o senhor lida com uma narrativa em que eventos da história da Inglaterra aparecem. Porque, afinal de contas, nós aqui no Brasil, na região em que estamos, que é a região sul, é uma das regiões mais bairristas, de defesa da sua história, de representatividade, de identidade. Como o senhor lida com narrativas ficcionais que usam como pano de fundo a história da Inglaterra? O senhor torce por alguém?
It's an interesting question. Yes, I mean, I think I do root for Britain probably, or for England. It's sort of baked into my DNA, because I grew up there and lived there for 35 years or more. And I think in my head I hear British voices and hear British characters, and of course I know British history incredibly well because that's where I was educated. How you deal with the history? You first have to know the history, of course, and I mean that's a huge amount of research, and I confess I do a lot of research. And then when you're dealing with real people like the Duke of Wellington. You really need to know him quite well. And oddly enough, I think I do know the first Duke of Wellington remarkably well. He hated authors and generally refused to talk to them, but he talks to me in my head. It's more difficult, of course, if you're dealing with a character like so-called King Arthur, because we know almost nothing about him. Or if we take Alfred the Great, who's a man I don't think I like very much, but I admire a lot. And again, it just came out of research. So you just research and research and research until, in a sense, you think you know them. And that's really rather a nice process. It's very nice to suddenly find yourself, as it were, on familiar terms with a character who's been dead for 200 or 1,000 years. I'm sure you find the same thing.
E a relação da construção da sua narrativa, já que o senhor acabou de citar a questão da experiência de trabalhar com personagens, as suas histórias surgem da narrativa em si, da história, ou da caracterização de uma personagem específica?
They emerge from the narrative itself. It's always the same. I mean, usually when you're being taught writing, you're told to plan your work. And I have a huge envy for writers who can do that. I mean, I know writers very well who literally plot out every chapter in advance before they even start the book. I just can't do it. I have no idea what's going to happen when I start a book. I might know where I want the book to end. It doesn't always end there, but I aim at that point. A very clever American writer once said that writing a novel is like driving down a country road that you've never driven before at night, and you can only see as far ahead as the headlights of your car show. And that's how I feel. That part of the joy of reading a good book is to find out what happens. For me, the joy of writing a book is to find out what happens. And I've literally got to the end of a book in the last chapter and not known how that chapter will end. I know the book is coming to an end, and I let the story tell me. I let the characters tell me. What do they want to do? And it's not the best way to write. I mean, it really isn't, because it means that 95% of your work is spent trying to find out what the bloody story is. But it works. At least it works for me. And I actually do really enjoy it. And oddly enough, I mean, if I'm taking the dog for a walk, I hear the characters telling me what they want to do in my head. They have conversations with me. I mean, maybe you should be a psychiatrist, Rafael, instead of a historian.
Olha, mas eu vou ser bastante sincero. Eu acho que não é bom mudar o método agora, porque parece-me que está funcionando muito bem. A gente tem gostado desse método aí de simplesmente começar na estrada vendo apenas o farol. Eu acho que o senhor deve continuar dessa forma, porque para nós, seus leitores, tem funcionado maravilhosamente bem.
I promise you I will. I'll go on writing that way. Thank you, Rafael.
Maravilha. Eu vou agora para uma outra pergunta que nos foi enviada, que é muito interessante, porque o senhor é um escritor que teve inúmeras obras adaptadas para cinema e televisão. Agora há uma série na Netflix que tem feito bastante sucesso, que tem sido muito assistida. Então, duas questões sobre isso. A primeira é, qual é a relação do escritor com a sua adaptação? Como se deu esse processo para o senhor? E a outra é mais uma curiosidade. Como foi participar como ator de uma série baseada na sua obra?
The answer to the first question is there is no relationship. I mean, I have nothing to do with it, and I insisted on that. They were very nice and said, did I want to be a technical advisor? And I said no. And the reason for that is that I worked in television for 11 years, and I know an enormous amount about producing news and current affairs television. I know nothing at all about how you produce drama. And the people who are making that series made Downton Abbey. Well, you know, they know everything. So I just thought, let them get on with it. We have a saying in England, you don't buy a dog and bark yourself. So I decided I wouldn't bark. So I leave it to them. And I think the great thing about that is that they add value. I mean, there are all these clever people, actors, directors, producers, makeup girls, costume people. All these people, they bring their skills to it, and they add value to it, and it's an immense value. So in the end, I tend to watch it just like everybody else. I don't know what's coming. I mean, there's going to be one more series in The Last Kingdom, which I think comes out next year. I mean, I won't know what's in it until I see it. Although after that, they're going to make a cinema film, a movie. So we have two things to look forward to. But then they did ask me if I wanted what they call a cameo appearance. And I jumped at it because, well, I was just fascinated, and it meant that I got a week in Hungary with the cast. And they dressed me up. They gave me hair extensions down to my waist. I looked like I was when I was 19. And then they murdered me. They had my hero murder me, which I thought was incredibly ungrateful of them. But it was huge fun. It really was enormous fun. So, I mean, that was icing on the cake. It was just a chance to go over there, say hello to everybody, and then have my throat cut by Uhtred. And I thought I died very well.
Não, eu acho interessante. Eu acho que foi uma participação fundamental para a série. E deve ter sido uma emoção muito grande poder participar daquilo, né? Porque geralmente as pessoas têm a vida do escritor como aquele sujeito solitário que está dentro da biblioteca escrevendo, e agora o senhor pôde experienciar a vida de um artista, um ator.
Well, yeah, there was that. I mean, I've been acting for about 12 years. I act in what we call a summer stock theatre, which is a theatre which just opens in the summer. And that's actually a huge relief because it means that for 3 months of the year, I'm not on my own. I'm actually in the group of very lively, very intelligent, very creative, and often very beautiful people. And it's huge fun. But I'd never acted on screen before, which was very different. But again, it was just nice to be with a group of very creative, very interesting. I'm not sure the word I want, but people who are just fun to be with. So I don't know. Maybe when they make the movie, they'll ask me to go back. They said, "Is there another part I want to play?" I said, "I want to play the part of an evil bishop."
Que é um ótimo papel. Bernard, nós estamos recebendo, enquanto nós estamos conversando no nosso canal do YouTube, estamos recebendo uma série de perguntas que eu vou passar agora para o senhor aos poucos. Nós temos aqui a pergunta do Júlio Ricardo da Rosa. Em seus livros anteriores, como a trilogia de Arthur e A Busca do Graal, os personagens eram mais profundamente construídos. Por exemplo, a bruxa Nimo, Merlin e a forma como Lancelot é apresentado. Nas crônicas saxônicas, os livros são mais orientados para a história. Isso se deve ao tipo de história que você está escrevendo ou uma tendência do seu trabalho atual?
No, I think it depends on what you're writing. I mean, the difference is that we do know something about Saxon history. I mean, the story of Uhtred in the Warlord Chronicles is the story of the making of England. And although we don't know much about that, we do have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and we have other sources. We know something. The great challenge of writing about Arthur was that we know absolutely nothing about him. We don't even know if he really existed. I think he did exist. But we know very little, and what we do know is mostly myth and legend, which made it a lot more fun. In fact, I have to confess, those three are my favorite books. The Winter King, Enemy of God, and Excalibur. But they were fun because we took the little we did know and then blew it up into 3 enormous books. And they're romantic, and for me the story works. But I never know whether I'd prefer to write about a period where I know everything or a period about which I know nothing. I think probably the answer is it's easier to write about a period where you know nothing, because then you make it all up, and that's my job. I'm a fiction writer.
E é justamente isso que o André Rafael Herzer te pergunta. Ele diz aqui, seus livros possuem inspiração histórica e acontecem no mundo real. O senhor pretende escrever algum livro ou série com um mundo criado pelo senhor ao exemplo do que fez Tolkien com a Terra-média?
Probably not. I mean, there are so many people who do that very, very well. My friend George R.R. Martin springs immediately to mind. And I've got nothing against that. I mean, I love Tolkien. I mean, I love George's stories. But, I mean, one, I'm very ancient. And I've made a living for 40 years writing historical novels. It doesn't seem the time to actually to go and write something else. And there are those people who would say that my books are fantasy anyway, so maybe I'm already doing it.
Talvez seja híbrido esse processo. Ainda veja que esse é um tema que toca muito aos seus leitores aqui que estão participando. Porque o Marcelo Thanos Martins diz, sou apaixonado pelos seus livros e gosto muito da seção final daqueles em que aparecem a parte fatos históricos, que são relativos à narrativa que foi usada como pano de fundo. E aí ele pergunta, como surgiu a ideia de fazer essa seção ao final da narrativa ficcional?
Well, I rather think of it as a confession. I mean, there's a book I'm very fond of, Sharp's Company, which tells the story of the siege of Badajoz in Spain in 1812. And the night that the British took Badajoz was a terrible night. It was ghastly. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of men died, and it was just dreadful. And they died because they tried to get through the breach of the city, and they failed. The French defended it too well, and the French slaughtered them in their hundreds. And a fake attack that was only meant to draw off the defenders worked. And when I came to write the book, I thought, well, Sharp is a hero. And if Sharp is a hero, he's got to be where the fighting is worst, which means he's got to be in the breaches. And as is Sharp, and as is my hero, he's got to get through the breach, which didn't happen. I thought, okay, you've got to write a note at the end of the book which tells the reader, look, I faked this. This isn't real. This is what really happened. And it just seems to me you've got to be fair with the reader. I mean, I changed history. And you can't let that change sit there. And I mean, some people believe historical novels. Well, you know, historical novels are fiction. And I think it's the duty of historical novelists to point out what is fiction and what is real. It's as simple as that. And I also like the historical note at the end of the book because it gives me a chance, in a sense, to make some comment about the story, which otherwise I wouldn't have the freedom to make. So I'm very glad that he noticed it, and thank you very much for pointing it out.
O senhor acabou de dizer que é importante que sejamos justos com o leitor. E aí nós temos dois leitores que fizeram perguntas que são bastante particulares deles. O primeiro é o Alexander Almeida. Ele diz que Richard Sharp é o favorito dele e ele gostaria de saber se haverá mais livros do Sharp além de Sharp's Assassin.
The answer to that is yes. It's the next book I write. Though what I'll call it, I don't know. I'm running out of titles after 22 Sharp books. I don't know. Sharp's Bridge, Sharp's Raid, I have no idea. But yeah, the next book I write is actually going to be another about Richard Sharp, which I didn't intend to do. I didn't plan it. But I so enjoyed writing Sharp's Assassin that I decided I'll stay with him. But I'm going to take him back again into the peninsula. So he'll either be in Portugal or Spain. I'm not sure which. I need to start the book. I should be doing it now, but I'm talking to you instead.
Mas olha, então até a pergunta que o Peu Holder fez é sobre isso, mas acho que o senhor já respondeu. Porque ele pergunta o que o senhor está trabalhando, o que vem por aí, mas então nós já sabemos que tem algo que vai passar na Península Ibérica, é isso?
Yeah, what I'm working on is planning that book, or at least researching that book. And then you mentioned earlier the 100 Years' War. Maybe next year it would be time to go back there. I never really know what I'm going to do ahead of time. I mean, this Sharp book has rather taken me by surprise. I didn't expect to be doing that. I thought I'd go back to the 100 Years' War this winter. I normally write my books over the winter. And it's already, gosh, it's almost November. And I normally start a book in the beginning of October, so I'm a month late. But I think the next one is another Sharp, and then probably next year, when I've done some research, some more back in the 100 Years' War.
Ótimo. E isso vai alegrar certamente um monte dos nossos leitores que estão nos assistindo. E agora eu tenho uma provocação da Cristiane Paim, que está de aniversário no dia de hoje e que é muito sua fã, mas a provocação dela é um problema para um escritor, que é por que o senhor matou a Estiorra e o Blackbird, e ela quer mais explicações sobre isso.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what's going to happen in a book until I write it. And sometimes, I mean, I had a villain in the Sharp books called Obadiah Hakeswill, and he's a vile man, an absolutely, utterly vile man. But he's the best villain I've ever written. And finally, I killed him off, and I've regretted it ever since because you only had to put Hakeswill in a book, and the book got exciting. I can't remember who did she regret that I killed?
Estiorra e Blackbird.
Oh, Black Bob Crawford. Well, I killed him because he really did die. I mean, you can't fake that. He died at Ciudad Rodrigo. So, I mean, much as I regret it, you know, that's it. He's dead. I mean, it's the same when I wrote Sharp's Trafalgar. I didn't want to kill Nelson, but, you know, you can't keep him alive. You can do all sorts of things in a historical novel, but you can't really change the basic facts of history. So I'm afraid Black Bob died because he died. I regretted that too.
Com a morte desses personagens, lhe dá algum tipo de dúvida se deve fazer essa alteração ou não?
Well, you can't change real history. I mean, you can't make Nelson survive Trafalgar. It just can't be done. I mean, yes, there are characters that you write and you know you're going to have to kill them off because they really did die, and you regret it because you like them. But on the whole, I deal in fictional characters, and as far as they're concerned, I can do whatever I like. Or I can't because they tend to dictate what they want. And there are characters that, I mean, certainly in the Arthurian books, there are moments when I almost found myself crying because people were dying and I liked them. And I don't think that's unusual. But I'm not as random as George Martin, and you know, he gets you to like a character a great deal, and then he'll just slaughter him and take you by surprise. I try not to do that. If a character I think the reader really likes, I try and keep that character alive. Although I must admit that I think in the second book I wrote, or third book, I brought on a young British boy, 13 years old, a really nice lad. and I had the French blow his head off with a cannonball. And one of my publishers in London said, "Oh, you can't do that. He's such a nice boy. You can't do it." I thought, you'll find out that I can. And it was every sharp book. The moment that a 12 or 13-year-old walks on, you know he's doomed. You know this kid is going to die simply to make this woman weep in London. Until I wrote Sharp's Trafalgar. And my wife read the first or second chapter and found this kid who I'd killed. And she said, "I can't read it because he's such a nice kid. I don't want him to die." I said, "You don't know that he dies." She said, "Of course he dies. It's your book." So I went and I changed the last chapter and made this kid live. And the wretched kid is still alive. I don't know what to do about him. I have to write another book and kill him off.
São as coisas que ficaram para depois. E que bom que ainda tem muita coisa aí guardada para a gente poder verificar na frente. O senhor citou justamente aí a questão da reação do editor. E há uma entrevista sua em que se traz o exemplo de um pequeno menino da sexta série que lhe enviou um e-mail e que o senhor mesmo acabou respondendo ao e-mail desta criança. Qual é a sua relação com os fãs? Como é que o senhor vê essa reação dos fãs? Se sente feliz por essa reação, uma satisfação com o trabalho?
I adore my fans. I mean, I'm terribly conscious that I live well because of them. I mean, you can see I work in a library. Well, the library was built by the people who buy my books, so thank you. And I get ideas from them. I mean, I like meeting people when I go and sign books. And sometimes they'll tell me something. I think that's a good idea. And very often it works. I can't remember that boy particularly, but a rather foolish Frenchman decided to publish the Sharp books in French, which, I mean, there are easier ways to lose money than that. And I had a dear little girl in Paris write to me. She'd fallen in love with Sharp, and I used to write back to her and saying, "Look, you're falling in love with the wrong guy. You know, you're French. He's fighting you." Excuse me. But no, I love the fans. And that was one of the pleasures of going to Rio de Janeiro a dozen years ago, was meeting so many people who liked the books and were enthusiastic about them. And in return, I try and be as enthusiastic about my fans too. And answer their questions and sign their books or do whatever I can and listen to them too. Listen to them because they have ideas. They tell me what they want. And I try and do that, try and give it to them.
Então, acho que numa próxima visita ao Brasil tem que vir a Porto Alegre, porque nós temos muitos e muitos fãs seus aqui e participando ativamente. Tanto é que, sobre isso mesmo que o senhor estava falando, eu vou ter duas perguntas aqui que chegaram agora. O André Rafael Herzer, que já participou há pouco, perguntou justamente qual o personagem que o senhor menos gostou de escrever sobre ele ou criar. E a outra pergunta é, do Gustavo Ferreira, como o senhor lida com as traduções para tantos idiomas diferentes, justamente no aspecto de manutenção da essência da personagem, de acordo com aquilo que o senhor queria?
I don't know what the answer to the first question is, who I like writing about least. No idea. I actually enjoy almost all the characters I write about. I mean, there's something nice about bringing a character to life, even if you don't like him. So I'm going to say I don't know the answer to that question. And the second one about the translations. I mean, sadly, I don't speak any languages other than English. So I don't know if the translations are good or bad. But you have to have a great deal of faith in your translator and suspect that they're doing a good job. And then you judge it, I suppose, by the letters you get from I mean, let's take Brazil, for example. We get a lot of messages from Brazil, and they're almost all very nice messages. So I assume that whoever is translating my books into Portuguese is doing a very good job, and I'm very grateful to them. I've only ever met one of my translators. I mean, in the end, once a book is translated, it's rather like once the book is made into a film or a TV series. It's out of your hands. I mean, you just have to hope that they retain the essence. And on the evidence, I think they do. So I like them. They're good.
Eu tenho uma última pergunta aqui, que eu acho que é uma das provocações mais complicadas para alguém que lida de alguma forma com o conteúdo histórico. Se houvesse a possibilidade de uma viagem no tempo, o senhor que trabalha tanto com o tema histórico, qual seria o período histórico que o senhor gostaria de ver? Quem fez essa pergunta foi o Marcelo Martins.
I have two answers to that. I mean, one, I would actually like to be at the Battle of Waterloo, although I want the people who arrange the time machine also to give me very good armor, because there's still things we don't know about that battle, and I've written 2 books about it, and I would love to know the answers, and the only way to do it is to go back. But if I had to choose just one place to go back to, I would go back to Elizabethan or Jacobean England and see Shakespeare on stage at the Globe Theatre, maybe in the first production or the very first performance of Hamlet. That would be wonderful. I would absolutely love to. I think, yes, more than anything, more even than the Battle of Waterloo, anything else, I want to be in the Globe Theatre watching Shakespeare on stage. And if any of you invent a time machine and can do that for me, I'll be eternally grateful. And Rafael, you're welcome to come with me.
Olha, eu achei o exemplo maravilhoso. Ver Shakespeare, ver o teatro. Eu acho que se inventarem essa máquina, eu faço questão de estar junto nessa viagem. Podemos fechar esse acordo aqui. O que o senhor acha?
We have a deal, absolutely. Yeah.
Ótimo. Bernard, eu quero agradecer imensamente a sua participação. Nós tivemos muitas pessoas nos enviando mensagens. Agradeço também imensamente a elas, mandando as suas perguntas. A sua participação certamente engrandeceu o nosso evento, esse evento que é tão importante para a nossa região. Eu agradeço imensamente a oportunidade de ter conversado com o senhor. Espero que venha ao Brasil assim que possível e espero que a gente possa continuar conversando muitas e muitas vezes. Muito obrigado. Peço que dê suas considerações, porque as coisas que são muito gostosas, elas passam rapidamente. E peço que o senhor dê o seu tchau para o público brasileiro.
Well, I'm not going to say goodbye. I'll say au revoir. I hope we can get back to Brazil, and I'm sure we will because we loved our visit so much. But thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Sander, too, who did the translating for us. And I suspect you did a very good job. And it was a great pleasure, and I would love to come to Porto Alegre. And let's just say I will come one day. Until then, thank you.
A gente já tem o acordo também da máquina do tempo, então possivelmente agora eu vou pressionar as pessoas aqui em Porto Alegre para inventar essa máquina para a gente realizar essa viagem o mais rápido possível.
I hope so. We can take wives with us too, or girlfriends, whatever.
Sim, acho que sim, até porque senão depois a gente não vai conseguir entrar em casa se elas não fizerem essa viagem juntos.
We'll make a date, Rafael. Thank you very much.
Pessoal, agradeço então a tradução do Sander, que foi belíssima. que vocês puderam acompanhar. Eu agradeço novamente a toda a organização da Feira do Livro. Convido a todos para que sigam acompanhando a nossa feira, a programação, tanto com as lives que são diárias, quanto a presença na praça. Até o dia 15 de novembro, as nossas barracas estarão ali montadas com a exposição dos livros, dos livreiros. Venham à Praça da Alfândega, participem das sessões de autógrafo que também são presenciais. Eu, Rafael Bassi, agradeço imensamente a Bernard Cornwell, agradeço imensamente a audiência de cada um e cada uma de vocês nesta tarde para a noite aqui no Brasil de sábado. Desejo a todos vocês um ótimo final de semana, uma ótima Feira do Livro. Até o nosso próximo evento.